The airport was louder than usual that afternoon. People were rushing in every direction, pulling their suitcases behind them, checking their phones, and looking up at the big departure screens again and again. Announcements echoed through the building, calling passengers to different gates. Some people looked excited about their trips, while others looked tired and stressed. It was just another busy day at one of the largest international airports in the country. Airline staff moved quickly behind the counters. They were used to the noise and the pressure. Every day, they handled hundreds of passengers. Some travelers were kind and patient. Others were angry and demanding. For the staff, it was important to stay professional and keep everything running on time. Even a small delay could create big problems. Near one of the long check-in lines stood a young Korean girl. She looked about 15 or 16 years old. She was not very tall, and she wore simple clothes, blue jeans, white sneakers, and a light gray hoodie. Her long dark hair rested neatly on her shoulders. She held her passport and boarding pass carefully in both hands, as if she was afraid of dropping them. This was her first time traveling alone. Even though she tried to look calm, there was a small nervousness in her eyes. She had arrived at the airport early, just like she had been told. She had checked her bag, gone through security, and followed every instruction carefully. She did not want to make any mistakes. She kept remembering the advice she had received before coming. Stay close to your gate. Listen carefully to announcements. Call if you need anything. She had nodded confidently at the time, but now that she was alone in the middle of the busy airport, everything felt bigger and louder than she expected. After passing security, she walked slowly toward her boarding gate. Around her, families were laughing together. Business travelers were typing quickly on their laptops. A little boy ran past her, dragging a small red suitcase with cartoon stickers on it. She smiled slightly at the sight, but then quickly looked down again. She found her gate and sat down in one of the empty chairs. She placed her small backpack on her lap and checked her boarding pass once more. The letters and numbers were clear. The flight number matched the one on the screen above the gate. The departure time was still the same. Everything seemed fine. She took a deep breath. She was traveling to visit her mother, who had been working in another city for several months. School was on break, and this was supposed to be a happy trip. She had been looking forward to it for weeks. She imagined the moment when she would arrive and see her mother waiting with a warm smile. To pass the time, she looked around at the other passengers waiting for the same flight. A group of college students were talking loudly about their vacation plans. An older couple sat quietly, holding hands. A businessman stood near the window, speaking seriously on his phone. The girl felt small among all of them. She checked her phone. There was a short message asking if everything was okay. She quickly typed back, "Yes, I'm at the gate. Boarding soon." She did not mention that she felt nervous. She did not want anyone to worry about her. An announcement finally came through the speakers. Boarding would begin soon. Passengers slowly started to stand up and form a line. The girl stood up too, holding her documents tightly. She joined the line at the back, waiting patiently. From where she stood, she could see the airline staff at the desk. A flight attendant and a gate agent were scanning tickets and greeting passengers. Some interactions were quick and friendly. Others took longer when there were questions about seats or baggage. The girl swallowed softly. She hoped everything would go smoothly for her. She had done nothing wrong. Her ticket was valid. Her passport was ready. Still, she could not stop the small feeling of worry in her chest. As the line moved forward, she stepped closer to the desk. She could now clearly hear the beeping sound of tickets being scanned. One by one, passengers walked through the gate and disappeared down the boarding bridge toward the plane. When there were only a few people left in front of her, she adjusted the strap of her backpack and took another deep breath. She reminded herself to speak clearly and politely. Finally, it was her turn. She stepped forward and gently handed her passport and boarding pass to the flight attendant. She tried to offer a small, respectful smile. In that simple moment, she believed this would be just another normal step in her journey. She had no idea that this ordinary afternoon at the airport was about to change in a way she never expected. The moment her boarding pass left her hand, something changed in the air. The flight attendant did not smile back. At first, it seemed like nothing unusual. The attendant glanced down at the ticket, then at the computer screen. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. The small scanner made a short beep, but it was not the normal confirmation sound everyone else had received. It was sharper. Louder. Wrong. The girl noticed it immediately. The flight attendant's eyebrows slowly pulled together. She scanned the ticket again. Another strange beep followed. This time, the gate agent beside her leaned over to look at the screen. "Can you step aside for a moment?" the flight attendant said, her voice firm but not yet harsh. The girl blinked. "I'm sorry," she asked softly. "Step to the side," the attendant repeated, already motioning for the next passenger to come forward. Confused, the girl picked up her small backpack and moved away from the line. She could feel eyes turning toward her. The passengers behind her began whispering quietly. She kept her head down, trying not to panic. Maybe it was just a small mistake. Maybe the system was slow. She watched as the line grew shorter and shorter. One by one, the remaining passengers boarded the plane without any problems. The staff continued scanning tickets normally, as if nothing unusual had happened. After a few minutes, the flight attendant called her back to the desk. "There seems to be an issue with your ticket," the attendant said, her tone now colder. The girl's heart skipped. "An issue?" she repeated carefully. "But I bought it weeks ago." The attendant turned the screen slightly but not enough for the girl to see clearly. "This booking number isn't showing up properly in our system." "That's impossible," the girl said quickly, her voice shaking a little. "I have the confirmation email. I checked this morning." She reached into her backpack and pulled out her phone. Her hands trembled slightly as she searched for the email. She found it and held it out politely. The flight attendant barely glanced at it. "This ticket isn't valid for boarding right now," she said. The words hit harder than the girl expected. "Please," the girl said, trying to stay calm. "There must be a mistake. Can you check again?" The gate agent beside the attendant looked unsure. "Maybe it's just a system delay," he started to say. But the flight attendant cut him off. "The flight is almost closed. We don't have time for this." The girl felt heat rising to her face. Other passengers who had not yet boarded were now openly staring. A middle-aged woman nearby shook her head slightly, as if assuming the worst. A man whispered something to his wife. The girl felt smaller by the second. "I promise I didn't do anything wrong," she said quietly. "I'm just trying to get on my flight." The flight attendant crossed her arms. "Where are your parents?" "I'm traveling alone," the girl answered honestly. That seemed to change something in the attendant's expression. It was not sympathy. It was suspicion. "Alone?" she repeated. "Yes, ma'am." The attendant sighed loudly, clearly frustrated. "These online third-party bookings cause problems all the time." "I didn't use a third party," the girl replied quickly. "It was booked directly." The tension between them grew heavier. The gate agent typed something else into the computer, frowning. "It's strange," he muttered. "The seat number exists, but the payment status." Before he could finish, the flight attendant made a quick decision. "Well, without confirmation in the system, she cannot board," she said firmly. The girl felt her chest tighten. "But the plane hasn't left yet," she said. "Please check one more time." "I can call." "Call who?" the attendant interrupted sharply. The question hung in the air. The girl hesitated for a second. "My father," she answered quietly. The flight attendant gave a short, almost dismissive smile. "Your father cannot fix an airline system error." The word stung. Around them, the final boarding call echoed through the speakers. "Last call for passengers on flight 247. The pressure increased. The attendant looked at the torn corner of the boarding pass where it had been scanned twice. "Without proper verification," she said, "this ticket is not acceptable." The girl stared at her, feeling helpless. She had followed every rule. She had arrived early. She had prepared everything carefully. "I can show you my ID again," she offered desperately. "Or my confirmation number." The flight attendant's patience snapped. In one sudden motion, she grabbed the boarding pass from the desk. Before the girl could react, the paper ripped in half. The sound was sharp and final. A few passengers gasped. The torn pieces fell lightly onto the counter. "There is nothing more I can do," the flight attendant said, her voice flat. For a second, the world felt completely silent to the girl. She stared at the torn paper as if it were not real. Her ticket. Her trip. Her plan to see her mother. All of it seemed to disappear in that tearing sound. Her eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She tried to speak, but no words came out. The flight attendant turned away, already calling for the next procedure to close the gate. The girl slowly stepped back. She had never felt so embarrassed in her life. And she had no idea that this moment, this public humiliation, was about to lead to something no one at that gate would ever forget. The sound of the paper tearing did not just echo at the gate, it echoed inside her chest. For a few seconds, she could not move. Half of her boarding pass remained in the flight attendant's hand. The other half slipped from the counter and floated to the floor. It felt unreal, like a slow-motion scene from a movie. People were still watching. Some pretended not to stare, but their eyes kept drifting back to her. The girl bent down quietly and picked up the torn piece from the ground. Her fingers were shaking. She stared at the ripped edges, trying to understand how something so small could suddenly change everything. Just minutes ago, she had been thinking about landing, about seeing her mother, about smiling and hugging her tightly. Now, she was standing alone near the gate, feeling like she had done something wrong, even though she knew she hadn't. The final boarding announcement rang out. The last few passengers hurried down the jet bridge. The gate agent closed the system. The door beside them shut with a heavy sound. The plane was leaving without her. A deep silence settled inside her mind. The busy airport noise faded into the background. She swallowed hard, forcing herself not to cry in front of everyone. She stepped away from the counter slowly. No one stopped her. No one explained anything further. She found an empty seat near the large glass window overlooking the runway. Outside, she could see planes moving, preparing for takeoff. She watched as the aircraft she was supposed to be on began to push back from the gate. Her throat tightened. She had followed every rule. She had double-checked her ticket. She had arrived early. Yet somehow, she was the one left behind. A group of nearby passengers whispered to each other. Maybe it was fake, someone muttered. She looked too young to travel alone, another voice said. Each word felt like a small cut. The girl lowered her head, pretending not to hear them. She did not want to argue. She did not want attention. She only wanted the mistake to be fixed. But now the plane was moving farther away. She took a slow breath and reached into her backpack again. This time, she pulled out her phone with more determination. Her hands were still trembling, but her eyes had changed. The fear was still there, but now there was something else too. Hurt. And quiet strength. She scrolled through her contacts and paused at one name. For a moment, she hesitated. She did not like asking for help. She especially did not like creating problems. Before leaving for the airport, she had promised she would handle everything on her own. She wanted to prove she was responsible enough to travel alone. But this was different. She pressed the call button. The phone rang once. Twice. Then the call connected. "Hey," came a calm, familiar voice on the other end. That single word made her eyes fill with tears she had been holding back. She quickly stood up and walked toward a quieter corner near a vending machine, away from curious ears. "They said my ticket isn't valid," she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. There was a short silence on the other end. "What do you mean?" the voice asked, now more serious. "They scanned it, and something went wrong," she explained. "She said it doesn't show properly in the system." And then, her voice cracked slightly. She tore it. There was another pause, longer this time. "Are you still at the gate?" the voice asked. "Yes." "Did they explain the payment issue?" "No. They didn't really check again." Her heart was beating fast now. Around her, airport staff walked past without paying attention. Travelers continued with their journeys. No one knew that the simple phone call she was making was about to change the energy of the entire terminal. "Stay right there," the voice said calmly, but with a firmness she recognized. "Don't leave." She nodded instinctively, even though she knew the person on the phone could not see her. "Okay." The call ended. For a few minutes, nothing seemed to happen. The airport remained busy. Luggage carts rolled by. A child laughed loudly somewhere nearby. But slowly, small changes began to appear. Two airport security officers walked quickly toward the gate area, speaking into their radios. A supervisor in a dark suit followed behind them. The gate agent looked confused as he saw them approaching. The girl remained seated, holding the torn pieces of her boarding pass in her lap. She did not look angry. She did not look powerful. She just looked like a quiet teenager waiting alone. But inside the airport, messages were already being passed. Calls were being made. Names were being mentioned. And within minutes, whispers began spreading for a completely different reason. "Is that really happening?" someone near the coffee stand said. "Why are security heading to that gate?" The flight attendant who had torn the ticket glanced up, slightly irritated by the sudden attention. She had no idea that the situation she thought was finished was only just beginning. Outside, through the glass windows, a sleek black vehicle pulled up near a restricted entrance of the airport. Inside the terminal, the atmosphere started to shift. The girl looked down at her phone again. A new message appeared, "I'm here." She slowly lifted her eyes toward the entrance of the terminal. And for the first time since her ticket was torn, she felt something stronger than embarrassment. She felt certain that everything was about to change. The message on her phone was short, but it carried weight. "I'm inside." She read it twice. Her heart began beating faster, not from fear this time, but from knowing that something serious was about to unfold. Around her, the airport still looked normal. People were buying coffee, checking flight screens, dragging suitcases across the shiny floor. But near gate 24, the air felt different. Tighter. Charged. The flight attendant was finishing paperwork at the counter, clearly ready to move on from the incident. The gate agent beside her looked distracted, glancing toward the corridor where security had just walked through minutes earlier. The girl stayed seated, her back straight, her hands folded over the torn pieces of her boarding pass. She did not want attention. She did not want drama. But she also knew she had done nothing wrong. Suddenly, a quiet wave of whispers began near the entrance of the terminal. "Is that who I think it is? No way. It can't be." Heads began turning. Phones slowly lifted into the air. A small crowd started forming near the security checkpoint, but not in panic, in disbelief. Walking calmly through the terminal, wearing a simple dark hoodie and a cap pulled low, was a man many people instantly recognized. Even dressed casually, his presence was impossible to ignore. Security walked respectfully beside him, not leading, following. It was Travis Scott. He did not look angry. He did not look dramatic. His face was calm, but focused. His eyes scanned the terminal quickly until they landed on one person sitting quietly near the window. Her. For a brief second, his serious expression softened. He walked toward her without hesitation. Passengers moved out of the way instinctively. Some stared in shock. Others whispered his name under their breath. A few began recording, sensing that something important was happening. The girl stood up slowly as he approached. "You okay?" he asked gently. She nodded, though her eyes were still slightly red. "I'm fine." He looked at the torn pieces of the boarding pass in her hand. His jaw tightened just slightly, not in anger, but in disbelief. Without raising his voice, without creating a scene, he turned toward the gate counter. The flight attendant was frozen. At first, she looked confused. Then recognition hit her face like a sudden flash of light. Her confident posture shifted. The firmness in her shoulders disappeared. "Good afternoon," Travis said calmly as he reached the counter. The entire gate area went silent. "I was told there was an issue with a ticket," he continued, his voice steady and controlled. The gate agent quickly stepped forward. "Sir, it appears there was a system error with the booking." "A system error?" Travis repeated quietly. The flight attendant cleared her throat. "The ticket did not show proper confirmation in the system at the time of boarding," she explained, trying to maintain professionalism. "Without verification, we could not allow boarding." "And tearing it?" he asked, lifting one eyebrow slightly. The question hung in the air. The flight attendant hesitated. "We were under time pressure." The gate was closing. The surrounding passengers listened carefully. No one spoke now. The earlier whispers had turned into complete silence. Travis did not raise his voice. He did not insult anyone. He simply looked at the counter screen. "Can you check again?" he asked. The gate agent nodded quickly and began typing. This time, his fingers moved faster, more carefully. Within seconds, his expression changed. "Oh," he muttered under his breath. "What is it?" Travis asked. "It shows confirmed now," the agent admitted. "The payment status was delayed in the system earlier. It just updated." The flight attendant's face turned pale. "So the ticket was valid," Travis said calmly. "Yes, it appears so." The girl stood a few steps behind him, watching quietly. She did not look proud. She did not look powerful. She simply looked relieved. The flight attendant swallowed hard. I apologize for the misunderstanding." Travis nodded once. "She's young," he said. "But she followed the rules. Respect matters." Those two words felt heavier than any shout could have. Airport management had now arrived at the scene, clearly aware that the situation had grown larger than a normal gate issue. They began speaking quietly with the staff, reviewing what had happened. The passengers nearby exchanged looks. Some seemed embarrassed for having judged the girl earlier. Others looked impressed by how calmly everything was being handled. Within minutes, arrangements were made. The girl was rebooked on the next available flight. This time, every detail was triple-checked. As the tension slowly faded, Travis turned back to her. "You good?" he asked again, softer now. She gave a small nod. "Yeah." He gave her a reassuring look. "Proud of you for staying calm." For the first time since the incident began, a small smile appeared on her face. Around them, phones were still recording. Social media notifications were already exploding. People had captured the moment, the arrival, the confrontation, the quiet correction. But what stayed with those who witnessed it in person was not the celebrity appearance. It was the lesson. Assumptions can be dangerous. Power does not always look loud. And respect should never depend on who someone's father is. As security escorted Travis toward a private exit, the airport slowly returned to normal. But Gate 24 would not forget that afternoon anytime soon. The moment Travis Scott entered the terminal, the atmosphere shifted completely. It wasn't just his presence that caught attention, it was the calm confidence he carried. There were no cameras flashing at him, no loud entourage, just a man walking purposefully, scanning the room until his eyes locked on the girl. The young Korean girl, clutching the torn pieces of her boarding pass, felt her heart race. Everything felt unreal, like a scene from a movie she had never imagined she would star in. Passengers around her began whispering. Some recognized him instantly, pointing discreetly to each other, while others were slower to catch on. "Isn't that?" one voice asked in disbelief. Phones began to quietly rise, capturing what everyone knew was a rare moment. People had seen his music videos, listened to his songs, but few had ever expected to encounter him in person, in a quiet airport terminal, without warning. He approached her slowly, his eyes calm, but filled with an unmistakable focus. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low and measured. She nodded quickly, swallowing the lump in her throat, unable to speak. She didn't want to cry, not here, not now, but the sheer relief that he was there, that someone finally understood, made her eyes prick with tears. Travis's attention then turned toward the flight attendant at the gate. The woman, who had been confident just moments ago, now looked pale. Her posture stiffened, and her usual composure seemed to crumble. She hadn't expected him, hadn't imagined the ticket issue could escalate to this level. "I was told there was a problem with a ticket," Travis said calmly, addressing the attendant and the gate agent beside her. There was no aggression in his tone, but the firmness left no room for excuses. The entire gate area seemed to quiet down, as if the walls themselves were listening. The gate agent quickly moved to type in the booking number again, checking the system more carefully than before. Travis waited silently, his gaze steady on the screen, watching as the agent's fingers flew across the keyboard. Within moments, the agent's expression changed. "Oh, it's showing valid now," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The payment confirmation had just updated. The attendant's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, but no words came out immediately. Travis looked at her, his tone even and calm, yet commanding. "The ticket is valid." She followed all the rules. Respect matters, especially for someone traveling alone. His words hung in the air like a lesson everyone at the gate could feel. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, remembering their earlier judgments. Others simply watched, captivated by the quiet authority he projected. This was not just about celebrity status, it was about fairness, accountability, and the way people treat one another. Travis then turned back to the girl, a small, reassuring smile softening his face. "You good?" he asked. She nodded again, her hands clutching her backpack, holding back a tremor of relief. "Yeah," she managed to whisper. Airport security had quietly moved closer, keeping a respectful distance. Management staff arrived shortly after, ensuring that the situation was resolved properly. The gate attendant offered another apology, her voice quieter and more sincere this time. The embarrassment she had caused moments ago seemed to weigh heavily on her, and there was no need for Travis to push further, the lesson had already been made clear. Arrangements were quickly made to rebook the girl on the next flight. Every detail was triple-checked this time, ensuring that the boarding process went smoothly. The passengers who had witnessed the drama whispered among themselves, some in admiration, others in guilt for having assumed the worst about the young traveler. As Travis prepared to leave, he leaned slightly closer to the girl. "I'm proud of you for staying calm," he said softly, as if offering a personal acknowledgement that would stay with her long after this day ended. She managed a small smile, the tension slowly melting from her shoulders. Around them, phones were still quietly recording, and social media notifications were already buzzing. People had captured a moment that would soon spread online, but for the girl, it wasn't the viral attention that mattered. It was the quiet affirmation, the presence of someone who understood the injustice, and the reminder that strength and composure could carry you through even the most humiliating moments. As Travis walked toward the private exit, security maintaining a discreet perimeter, the terminal began to return to normal. Travelers resumed their routines, announcements continued over the speakers, and luggage carts rolled across the floor. But for Gate 24, the day had been anything but normal. The young girl sat for a moment longer, holding the now-repaired boarding pass in her hands. Her chest still raced, but not from fear. It was excitement, relief, and a growing sense of empowerment. The experience had been overwhelming, humiliating, and extraordinary all at once. She realized she had faced something most people would never encounter, and she had survived it with grace. Passengers passing by couldn't help but glance at her with newfound respect, and some smiled quietly, remembering how quickly assumptions could be wrong. The gate would be filled with whispers of what had just happened for weeks to come, a story that reminded everyone that kindness, patience, and understanding should never depend on who someone is, or who they know. The girl gathered her belongings, took a deep breath, and walked toward her next flight, stronger, calmer, and forever changed by a day she would never forget. The gate was quiet now, but the tension lingered in the air, like the remnants of a storm that had passed too quickly to fully notice. The flight attendant, who had moments ago been confident and commanding, now felt a heavy weight pressing down on her shoulders. Her hands trembled slightly as she straightened papers on the counter, trying to regain composure. She had never expected the situation to escalate this far, and certainly never expected Travis Scott to appear in person. The young girl sat quietly a few steps away, clutching her boarding pass, still reassembled and now official once again. She felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. Part of her wanted to run and hug her father, but she also felt a strange pride. She had stayed calm, had spoken politely, had handled herself with dignity even while being humiliated. The lessons she had learned in those minutes felt heavier and more meaningful than any school lesson she had ever had. Travis Scott stood calmly beside her, observing the situation with quiet authority. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make demands. Yet his presence alone carried the weight of someone who would not tolerate injustice. He glanced at the gate attendant, not with anger, but with the sharp clarity of someone who expected accountability. "Can we explain exactly what happened?" he asked gently, directing the question to the gate agent and the flight attendant. The gate agent took a deep breath, glancing nervously at his colleague. "There was a minor system delay," he explained. "The payment confirmation hadn't updated immediately. Her booking was valid all along, but the system didn't reflect it in real time." The attendant's face fell. She swallowed hard. She had made a decision in seconds, decisions that now looked reckless in hindsight. I thought I was doing the right thing," she murmured. Travis's gaze softened slightly as he addressed her. "You didn't check fully before acting," he said calmly, yet with undeniable firmness. "Sometimes, assumptions can hurt people more than mistakes themselves." She did everything right. And yet, she was humiliated publicly. The word seemed to echo around the gate. Other passengers, many of whom had been watching in disbelief, now nodded silently. They had seen the harsh effects of assumptions and impatience, and the lesson was clear without any shouting or confrontation. The young girl looked up at her father, her eyes still wide but calmer now. I didn't know what to do," she whispered. "You did the right thing by staying composed," Travis said. "You showed patience, and that matters more than anyone tearing up a ticket." His voice was quiet, steady, and somehow reassuring. Airport management had arrived by now, quietly taking notes and speaking with staff. They were concerned not just with the procedural error, but with the public nature of the incident. The airline's reputation was at stake, but more importantly, they saw the human side of what had happened. A young traveler had been embarrassed and exposed to public judgment for a mistake that wasn't hers. Travis leaned down slightly to his daughter. "It's important to remember this moment," he said softly. "Not because of the mistake, but because of how you handled it. Strength isn't always loud, it's quiet, controlled, and dignified. She nodded slowly, taking in every word. The words felt heavier than any lecture she had ever heard. She realized that strength wasn't about yelling back or fighting in the moment, it was about composure, even under pressure. Meanwhile, the flight attendant was left to reflect on her own actions. She looked at the girl, then at Travis, and finally at the torn boarding pass she had destroyed. She felt a flush of guilt and a lingering embarrassment that no apology could fully erase. But she also knew that this was a lesson she would never forget. She had acted hastily, without full information, and it had consequences. Seeing how calmly Travis and his daughter handled the situation made her realize the true impact of her choices. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation slowly returned to their routines, but the energy had shifted. The whispers that spread earlier were no longer about celebrity recognition, they were about respect, fairness, and the courage to remain composed under public scrutiny. Many passengers glanced at the girl now with admiration, recognizing the quiet bravery it took to endure the humiliation gracefully. As arrangements were made to board her on the next flight, every detail was triple-checked. This time, there would be no mistakes, no torn tickets, no unnecessary tension. She was finally ready to continue her journey, not just to reach her destination, but carrying a new understanding of patience, strength, and dignity. Travis stayed with her until she was comfortably seated and ready to board, offering a final nod of encouragement. "Remember this," he said quietly. "You handled it with respect. That's something no one can ever take from you." And with that, the moment at gate 24 came to an end, a mix of relief, lessons learned, and quiet inspiration. For the girl, it was a turning point she would carry with her forever, a reminder that even in moments of humiliation and error, grace, patience, and calm can turn the situation around in ways no one could imagine. The airport slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but gate 24 remained charged with a quiet energy that no one could ignore. Passengers had gone back to their routines, but the story of the Korean girl and her torn ticket lingered in whispers. Some shook their heads at the memory, others smiled quietly at the lesson it had delivered, and a few still stared at the girl with admiration. She, however, felt a strange mix of relief and reflection, her heart still racing from the chain of events that had unfolded. The flight attendant who had torn the ticket stood behind the counter, trying to regain her composure. She adjusted her uniform several times, her hands trembling slightly. It wasn't anger she felt now, it was something heavier, more uncomfortable. Guilt. Humiliation. The realization that a moment of impatience had escalated into a scene witnessed by dozens of people, and now captured on countless phones and likely destined for social media. She replayed the incident in her mind, the beeping scanner, the girl's nervous face, the sudden ripping of the ticket, and then the unmistakable calm authority of Travis Scott stepping in. Every detail reminded her that she had acted too quickly, too impulsively. The gate agent next to her lowered his head. "We should have double-checked before she boarded," he admitted quietly. "It was a system error. Nothing was wrong with the ticket." "Yes," the attendant whispered, almost to herself. She realized that authority without empathy could create disasters in moments. She had followed protocol, or so she thought, but in reality, she had ignored patience, common sense, and respect. The girl, seated nearby with her repaired boarding pass, was quietly observing everyone. She felt the strange sensation of being both embarrassed and empowered at the same time. Her father's presence had changed the course of events, but her composure had held the moment together. It wasn't the celebrity intervention that mattered most, it was how she had endured the humiliation, the whispers, and the judgment with grace. A few passengers approached her quietly, offering smiles or nods of encouragement. "You were so brave," one woman whispered. Another teenager said simply, "I would have cried." Their words made her feel lighter, as if her strength had not gone unnoticed. Travis Scott had already moved toward the private exit, escorted by security, but his words lingered. "You handled it with respect. That matters more than anything else," he had said. Those words were now echoing in her mind. She realized that true power was not about status, wealth, or influence. It was about composure, patience, and integrity, even when no one was watching. Meanwhile, the flight attendant reflected further. She began to understand the human cost of assumptions. It wasn't just a ticket, it was a person's experience, their dignity, their first time traveling alone, and in that moment, she had acted without empathy. She knew the lesson would stay with her forever. Next time, she promised herself, she would check before judging, listen before deciding, and remember that every passenger had a story that she could not see. Airport management, now observing from a distance, spoke quietly to the staff. This could have escalated even further, one supervisor said. It's a reminder that professionalism isn't just following rules, it's about understanding the person behind the ticket. As boarding for the next flight began, the girl prepared herself, her hands steady now, her mind clearer than it had been all morning. She knew that this experience would stay with her forever, not as a source of shame, but as a reminder of her own strength and dignity. She had faced public judgment, humiliation, and confusion, yet she remained calm. That calmness had turned the tide. The whispers of the other passengers continued, now tinged with respect rather than gossip. The gate attendant finally approached the girl quietly. "I'm very sorry for what happened," she said, sincerity evident in her voice. "I hope you have a safe flight." The words, simple as they were, carried weight, an acknowledgement that actions have consequences, and that humility could restore balance. As she boarded her flight, the girl looked back briefly at Gate 24. The incident, once terrifying and humiliating, had transformed into a quiet lesson for everyone present. Respect, patience, and empathy had proven far more powerful than anger, assumptions, or authority alone. And for the flight attendant, that day would be remembered as a turning point. A reminder that every passenger has a story. That rules, when enforced without understanding, can harm more than help. And that sometimes, a small act of patience could prevent a humiliation that no apology could fully erase. Gate 24 fell silent again, returning to routine operations. But the story of that afternoon, the torn ticket, the calm composure of a young girl, and the quiet authority of Travis Scott, would remain in the memories of all who witnessed it. It was more than an airport incident. It was a lesson in human dignity, humility, and the lasting impact of treating every person with respect. The terminal had mostly returned to its usual rhythm, but Gate 24 would never feel ordinary again. Passengers whispered quietly to one another, replaying the shocking scene in their minds. Phones were still raised, videos being shared, comments whispered about the dramatic turn of events. For many, it was a story of celebrity surprise. For others, it had become a lesson in humility, respect, and human dignity. The young Korean girl held her repaired boarding pass tightly, a quiet smile forming on her lips. She had survived the humiliation, remained composed, and had seen how patience and integrity could turn even the most tense situation around. Her father's presence had certainly amplified the attention, but it wasn't that alone that made the experience unforgettable, it was the way she had handled herself. She had been embarrassed, frightened, and powerless moments ago, but now she felt a quiet sense of pride. As she walked toward the jet bridge for her flight, she noticed passengers giving her subtle nods or smiles, acknowledging the calm bravery she had displayed. One family whispered to their child, "See how she stayed calm. That's strength." Another passenger quietly said, "I would have panicked completely." Meanwhile, the flight attendant who had torn the ticket earlier lingered near the counter. She avoided direct eye contact with anyone but couldn't stop replaying the events in her head. She had acted hastily, letting frustration override judgment. She had humiliated a young girl who had done nothing wrong. And now, she had seen firsthand the power of composure, the kind of quiet dignity that could leave even the most intimidating adult humbled. The gate agent, quietly observing, shook his head slightly. "That could have been handled so differently," he muttered. He, too, had learned the weight of assumptions and the importance of patience. Airport management stepped in briefly, ensuring that the girl's next flight was fully prepared and that all staff understood what had occurred. While the incident had already captured the attention of travelers and staff alike, the story would soon spread far beyond the terminal. Social media would buzz, news outlets would cover the viral moment, and countless viewers would debate the lessons learned. But the true impact was personal. The girl had proven to herself, and everyone who saw it, that composure and courage matter more than panic or anger. Her father, Travis Scott, had already left through a private exit, but his presence lingered in the terminal, almost like a silent affirmation. He had demonstrated restraint and authority without humiliation or rage, guiding the situation to resolution with quiet confidence. And in doing so, he had shown that influence and power are not defined by force, but by the ability to correct injustice calmly and wisely. The girl boarded her flight with steady hands and a clearer mind. She glanced once more at the terminal, at the gate where everything had spiraled into chaos. The torn ticket, the whispers, the stunned silence, it had all happened, and yet she had emerged with something far greater than fear, perspective. She had learned about patience, respect, and the quiet strength that comes from staying composed even under public scrutiny. Passengers on the plane watched her take her seat, some noticing the small but confident way she handled her belongings, how her posture reflected resilience. They may not have known the full story yet, but the impression was clear. This young girl had endured a moment of public embarrassment and had come out stronger, teaching everyone around her a lesson they would not soon forget. Back at Gate 24, life slowly returned to normal. Airport staff busied themselves with boarding and departure checks. Travelers moved toward other gates, conversations resumed, and the loudspeaker announcements continued. But for anyone who had been present, the events of the afternoon had left a lasting mark. It was no longer just an airport gate, it was a lesson in human behavior, humility, and empathy. And while the world outside would soon know the story through viral videos and social media posts, the girl carried her own private victory, the knowledge that dignity, patience, and quiet courage had transformed a humiliating moment into an unforgettable life lesson. She had learned that sometimes, the most powerful actions are not loud, flashy, or forceful, they are calm, measured, and guided by integrity. As the plane took off and she looked out the window at the shrinking terminal below, she smiled softly. Gate 24 had been a place of tension, embarrassment, and fear, but it had also been the stage for a lesson she would carry for the rest of her life. And that, she realized, was far more valuable than any ticket, any flight, or even the attention of the world. Her journey was no longer just about reaching her destination, it was about understanding herself, the power of composure, and the lasting impact of respect and patience in moments when it is most needed.